Just because someone is not trying to scam you out of your hard-earned money doesn't mean that they don't see you as a pawn, a stepping stone, or a means to an end. Find out how to protect yourself from a narcissist. Our guest today is Dr. Ramani Durvasula. Dr. Durvasula is one of the world-leading experts on narcissism, a clinical psychologist, professor, best-selling author, and speaker. She is on a mission to demystify and dismantle the toxic influence of narcissism on all of our lives. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast and sharing your expertise with us. Can you give me a background as to how you got interested in psychology?
Yeah. I mean, listen, there's either you become an astronomer or a psychologist, is that how I see it, or an oceanographer, right? Because it is, human nature is so fascinating. And I think that as a psychologist, especially as a clinical psychologist, you're equal parts, not just you could be a researcher, you're a scholar, you're a scientist, but there's also something almost shamanistic about it. I think that as long as there's been two human beings in the world, one of them was trying to understand the other. And so it's been, although it's considered a science in its relative infancy, I think actually people have been trying to understand human nature for thousands and thousands of years. And so that's how I got into it. Now, this area of narcissism is a bit more of a recent 10 to 15 year kind of recent for me. I started doing work in sort of understanding what are the things that put people at risk in terms of their health, lead people to maybe make less than optimal health choices, and also how they treat healthcare personnel. And one thing that we were noticing anecdotally is that there are some people who come into clinics and totally abuse the receptionists and abuse the nurses and ultimately abuse the physicians. Nobody liked being with them. People would cringe when they'd see this patient's name on the schedule. And I thought, this is interesting. First of all, I understand why they're cringing, but it all but guarantees that this person's not going to get the best quality health care. But then I thought, what about in other areas of their life? And not surprisingly, the difficult patient in the clinic is the difficult partner, is the difficult sibling, is the difficult child, is the difficult parent. And this idea of difficult people then also started aligning with what I was seeing in my clinical practice, which were people who were in these marriages with people who just literally invalidated them, devalued them, did not listen to them, showed no empathy to them, and the pattern never, ever changed. People would suffer in like this 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, every year making a new promise that maybe this year it's going to be different. Maybe this year it's going to change. Maybe when he gets a promotion, maybe when she gets the house she wants, maybe when the kids are older, maybe, the maybe would never come. And I saw that the fallout for people who stayed in these relationships, whether it was their parents, whether it was their partner, they were pretty shredded. And I thought, gosh, psychology isn't talking about this. This isn't the traditional violent relationship. It wasn't necessarily always the case that these people were being physically beaten up or sexually assaulted. It was very much like just this chronic, invalidating, unempathic, basically you existed to serve the narcissist kind of a situation. It really does a number on people. So that's how I got into it. And now I'm in it. And it's really sort of more as much of a mission and a vision as I could then, as it is a sort of area of scientific interest of mine.
That's very interesting. So when it comes to obviously my audience, I'm trying to educate people about not becoming victims. When we're talking about these types of neurological, pathological, psychological, pathological. I'll give you psychological. Sure. I'm in IT. I don't know all the terminology. So is there, I often hear like all these terms kind of thrown out together, and I'm sure there's differences between them, but you have narcissism, psychopaths and sociopaths, and maybe there's some overlapping between them. Can you kind of illuminate us on that?
The distinction between narcissism, psychopathy, and sociopathy is one that a lot of people grapple with. The terms are often used interchangeably and incorrectly. There's a big difference. So narcissism is very much a pattern of a person who lacks empathy, is deeply entitled, grandiose, arrogant, very superficial, constantly needs validation and admiration. They're very sensitive. They fall apart under criticism or feedback. They get very vindictive or rageful. They feel like victims a lot. They're Their self-esteem is very vulnerable. It's very variable. They're having a good day. They're the king of the world. But if something doesn't go their way, their entire world shatters. And they tend to lash out at other people. But the core of it, there is a sort of a core self-esteem deficit, a sort of core ego fragility, that's what a narcissist is. Now, when you jump the rails over to psychopathy, you're in a little bit of different territory. There's a lot of similar top notes. Psychopaths also don't have empathy. They are very arrogant. They can be grandiose. They're very entitled. But the chilling difference between the two is narcissists actually do experience remorse. And actually, they often experience that remorse as shame. And they don't like feeling shameful. So they'll often react with rage. They'll blame other people for what they did. But because they actually do it like, I shouldn't have cheated on my wife. I shouldn't have stolen that money. Psychopath, very little, if any, remorse. So they are more your hired assassins, the people who are willing to do cold-blooded stuff because honestly, it doesn't register. Psychopaths are unique, and there's some interesting research on the nervous system that shows that psychopaths are very what we call stress tolerant, meaning the kinds of stress that would put the rest of us spinning around, they're very, very cool under those conditions. They're also not prone to anxiety. So the things that would make a person anxious, think about it. Like if I saw someone's purse in a store open and there's cash in it, the thought of taking the cash out of that purse would I'm having panic thinking about that. I couldn't imagine doing that. That makes me anxious. For a psychopath, there's zero anxiety. They just stick their hand in that purse and walk away. And there would not even be an ounce of a racing heartbeat or anything. So their autonomic nervous systems are very different. And because they don't get anxious, they don't get worked up, they're able to break the law, flout the rules, violate people's rights. They make great criminals because they don't feel remorse. And because they don't feel remorse, they actually do really well under questioning. Because they don't feel anxiety, they're really great under questioning. Now, psychopaths are much like some narcissists. They can be charming, intelligent, clever, charismatic, and very confident. And people say, well, God, these psychopaths sound terrifying. I said, maybe so. But on the surface, they are as suave and calm and cool. So people are very drawn to them. And because in our culture, we think calm and cool is confident, and we think confident is good, and those are not always accurate, good kinds of leaps to make, people fall into them. Sociopaths, a little bit different. There is some belief that psychopathy likely potentially has a genetic element. There are central nervous system differences we see in the brain of a psychopath. We often see that it tends to run in families, again, highlighting the possibility that there's a pretty solid genetic piece to it. They have that stress resistance. Your sociopaths are a little bit of a messier group. Some people argue that psychopaths actually are surprised that there are rules. They're like, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, that guy did me wrong. I killed him. Like, what's the problem? And they literally almost all the way, like, in fact, people are like, is this person insane? The insanity defense doesn't work with psychopathy, just so you know. But they really don't get it. Sociopaths know the rules. They know the rules and they still break them. Sociopaths tend to be more combative. They're your bar fighters. They're the person who will get angry in a bar and beat someone up. They are your very agitated guy in prison. They're constantly punching and fighting. They're messy. They tend not to be calm, cool, collected, charming, and charismatic. They're just much more blustery. And the sociopath can be something that can also come out of a difficult backstory. They've had maybe more challenges they've had to overcome. They may have come from a place where there's a lot of community violence or there has been trauma. That's not necessarily always the case with psychopathy. So I hope that makes sense. It's a long-winded explanation, but there's some definite differences between the two. And I'd say at the end of the day, the narcissist is insecure, does feel anxiety, does feel remorse. Psychopath doesn't feel any of those things. Much more cool, much more calculated.
Gotcha. I think that's helpful to kind of understand that. So does that lead into there being more like warning signs that you're dealing with one versus the other?
Yes. One warning sign I'd say would be very different is narcissistic individuals are very sensitive to any form of criticism. And it can be the tiniest slight. It could be that you don't give them the right seat at the dinner table. It could be that you make an offhanded comment about a restaurant that they chose. Or you might even say, wow, I like that tie you're wearing. I saw that you wore it last week and I meant to compliment you on it. And they'll say, what are you saying? I only have 2 ties? Is that what and you're like, oh my gosh, I was just trying to tell you have a nice tie. So there's this sensitivity. You're not going to see that with psychopathy. There is a coldness in psychopathy. And if you don't know to look for coldness, a lot of people look at that coldness and they see it as a confidence. They might even see it as almost a masculinity, right? And if you don't see it for the coldness that it is, an almost surgical precision, you might miss that warning sign. I think the narcissists give more warning signs in a way because that they are so sensitive to criticism of any kind. Psychopaths lie more. So if you can catch them in a lie, they'll lie earlier. They'll often have aliases. They'll often they're giving you so many stories that if you're listening carefully, you'll be like, that's interesting. He said he was growing up in Indiana, but he was still talking about that warm winter one year. Like, you got to pay attention. So it's like, because they're the ultimate con men, are psychopaths. And it doesn't matter if that psychopath is a CEO or a guy running a racket in the streets, they're still con men.
So let's go out of order what we talked about a little bit before, because you mentioned, CEO. So do we see narcissists, playing bigger roles or having advantages or even being celebrated in certain either occupations or roles?
Narcissists have huge advantages. They make more money. They're more likely to end up in leadership positions. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Narcissists want to be the leaders. They like being the center of attention. They like the power. They like the validation. A lot of the rest of us are perfectly, competent to be leaders. Like, I don't know, I don't want the headache. Like, I like what I do and I don't need the attention. So they're naturally drawn to fight for it, and they often will get it because they're really, really good at self-promotion. And because and most of us aren't good at self-promotion and they're so good at it, people actually believe they're hyped. So, and the world enables them. We make excuses for them, rationalizations and justifications for their behavior. We're like, well, they must know what they're talking about it because they certainly are awfully confident, instead of saying, maybe this fool doesn't know anything they're talking about. And we don't question it. And so we see them overrepresented in leadership positions, overrepresented in the roles of things like CEOs, overrepresented in people who are in positions of power. We do, because they want the power. Power is very important.
Would you also see them kind of in roles in like social activism or philanthropy?
You're a genius, Chris, for asking that question. You set me up beautifully for something that many people don't know. What gets really interesting is that there's a subset of narcissists. Here's the bottom line. Narcissists are motivated to get validation. Okay. Now that validation can come through anything. It could come from how they look or how they gain attention or the money they have. But there's some of them who will give charitably their time, their money, because they want validation. It's actually not because of the meaning and purpose that they believe in the organization. And they often want a lot of attention for it. They insist on their name on the building. They want the big gala. They want lots of people seeing how wonderful they are. They go to the soup kitchen and make sure that the lighting is perfect that day at the soup kitchen so everybody can see them giving meals to those in need. There's a lot of, they only will do charity as long as the lights are on and the cameras are rolling. So it's very validation seeking. And so it's actually a form of narcissism called communal narcissism, where they get their validation by giving to other people, but they're still really jerky. So people are like, wow, what a humanitarian. And they're like abusing their staff and they're mean to their partners and they're like mean people, but they're with their ladle at the soup kitchen. So they have it on.
So are people like dismissive of the jerkiness or the problematic stuff because it's kind of like, well, because they're such a philanthropist, we'll accept that they're cheating on their spouse or they're really obnoxious to people?
We absolutely make excuses for people on the basis of what we believe to be their good work. Like, oh gosh, you know what? That $2 million they gave certainly helped a lot of kids and I'm not his wife, so why should I care? And so there's a lot of excuse making. And this excuse making is part of the enabling of narcissism in our society at large. It's honestly why I think we're in the messes we're in right now, is that we really, really, it's like if you never gave a child a bedtime, you're going to have like a 7-year-old who's lying on the couch watching the Late Show at 1 a.m. Like you got to give people some boundaries. And so what we've done is we've turned these narcissists into the spoiled children of our worlds. But the problem is these spoiled children are running our countries, running our companies, they're running our institutions, they're running our systems, and this world is a mess right now. And so I do think that we've enabled this, and social media didn't help. I mean, who wins the most at social media? Narcissists. They love attention, so they're going to double down on making it a full-time endeavor to take selfies, edit selfies, live a life where they can always be taking pictures, perhaps ensuring that they're going to said soup kitchen or whatever it is to get those moments. And so even that space enables them, because the influencers and all of that, what are they? They're people who are drawing attention to themselves for their own profit.
Even at the, what's the expression, even under the condition of like, even bad publicity is good publicity, do they even really care whether it's good or bad? Because I hear like they want the attention, but if they're also really sensitive to whether it's affirming or not affirming, does that like does it backfire for them?
It backfires all the time for them, because what's very interesting is that one of the biggest crises for the narcissist is shame. Okay. So the one thing the narcissist never wants is to be found out, right? If somebody can really see that I'm not really the real deal. Remember, they're very fragile inside. And the idea that anyone would ever see their fragility, the fact that they're not perfect, is very unsettling for them. So if by your criticism or your feedback or your mean social media comment, you lift back one of the layers on that, they get incensed. Rage is the only word I can use. And you'll see these sort of Twitter smackdowns they'll have. Like they're going after people's kids and grandmothers in the attacks. And then they'll say something regrettable. They will be tried in the court of public opinion. That account might even get shut down, but they can't stop themselves. So in other words, they want to be able to say what they say with impunity, but they're absolutely not able to handle it when people come back at them with a criticism, and they completely fall apart.
So the whole concept of don't dish it out, and if you can't take it, doesn't apply to...
No. One of the big core issues in narcissism is hypocrisy. They're incredibly hypocritical. They're like, that's the entitlement. One set of rules for me, one set of rules for you. And they don't seem to have a problem with it. Like that completely makes sense to them. Remember, they have to believe they're special to protect that.
So they're even like celebrating that the rules don't apply to them.
Yeah. They absolutely are. We're seeing this left and right in the world we live in right now. You know, I shouldn't have to wear this. I shouldn't have to do that. It's very much, I'm too special for the rules. And then they become oppositional little children if they're made to follow a rule. In fact, they often organize themselves around breaking rules, getting away with it, or then filing lawsuits or all kinds of things if they can't get their way. So they will use whatever systems they need to ensure that they win and feel like the rules are for them. Because otherwise they feel very victimized. If things don't go their way, they get lost in their victimhood, and they get very angry, very sullen, very resentful.
So I can start to see things coming out of the mist in my mind of like, okay, I can start seeing things coming together. I suspect there's some very significant risks of either working directly for or working at a company that's run by a narcissist, or being in a relationship with one. What are those risks?
Oh, it's really bad for your health. It's insanely toxic. The risks are things like feeling chronically confused, full of self-doubt, anxious, having other negative mood states like depression, having difficulty sleeping, not engaging in adequate self-care, feeling helpless, hopeless, and powerless. These are all very, very bad states of mental health. And so you'll find people who might actually cope in maladaptive ways. They may use drugs or alcohol to numb the discomfort they're experiencing. They may isolate from other people. There may even be a sense of shame of, how did I get into such a mess? Why am I in this situation? And part of what keeps people in these situations is they do not understand what the most basic precept of narcissism. It doesn't change. What you see is what you get. There is no magic wand. And I got to tell you, as a therapist who works with lots of narcissistic clients, if this is healthy and this is where they're at, I can get them to here. It's a big gap. And so I mean, even when they do get help, it's really, they're not often willing to integrate it. It's too threatening to them. I mean, it's a unicorn. Every so often somebody makes a big turnaround, but it is literally a unicorn. And so if you don't understand that it doesn't change, you could actually destroy yourself in the process of trying to make it change in that other person.
Wow. So maybe on a little bit of a tangent here. So is it more of a narcissism, a learned behavior, or are people kind of, I don't want to say born that way because kind of feel bad about like putting somebody in a box, but is it like born out of like childhood trauma, or is this like a learned behavior over the years that like I've learned that this is effective?
It's a very developmental pattern. So some people, and I agree with this, there's some inborn elements to this that are probably what we call temperamental. There might be people who are born into this world with a slightly more hypersensitive temperament and more of an oppositional temperament, but that can be shaped depending on the world they're in. But that definitely could set a vulnerability. However, what we do know about narcissism is there's a couple of different pathways that get people to adult narcissism. One is what you mentioned: trauma, neglect, inconsistency, lack of safety. That can come from literal trauma, a child growing up with abuse and all of that. It can also come from inconsistency that comes from growing up in a very chaotic space. And some of that can't be helped. It may be sort of what's happening in the world that they live in. It could be a war or something like that. The other pathway is what we sort of call a person who's over and underindulged. They may be very overindulged in terms of there may be more than enough resources around them. They grow up in a beautiful home. They're given lots of experiences. They're lavish with gifts, but they're underindulged with regard to their emotional worlds. There's absolutely no discussion of emotion, especially with boys. We see this. Don't cry. When they try to talk about their feelings, there's nobody who will listen, or they'll shame them for sharing their feelings. That combination is also a nice fast track to narcissism. Another way that a person can also get there is what we call growing up in a very conditional way. You're loved when you get the soccer goal. You're loved when you get into the good kindergarten. You're loved when you get into the ballet pageant, whatever it is. You're loved when you win the beauty pageant. You understand that your love comes through a condition, when you please the parent, when you give them something. So it's likely a combination of these pathways. And then the final one is that you got a narcissistic parent. Not only is that a very impoverished way to grow up, you also may be modeling their entitled kind of dismissive behavior. So you can see it's kind of a mishmash of pathways that get a person. And the kind of narcissist they are has a little bit to do with what pathway got them to their adulthood narcissism.
Gotcha. And I think we kind of covered it, but before we go on, are there consistent expressions, things, manifestations that we see from narcissists in kind of day-to-day interactions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we do see is that at the surface level, they're often very charming, engaging, charismatic, confident. Like, people are drawn to them. That's why they often become leaders. But the other things we'll often see is a dismissiveness, especially when things that are emotional are being discussed or things that have nothing to do with them. Many narcissists around there walk around saying, I have ADD. I'm like, why is it again? Their reasoning is that they may expect full attention when they're speaking, but when somebody else is speaking, they'll be fooling with their phone and fooling with this. And people say, how come you're not paying attention when he's speaking? I have ADD. I'm like, well, that was selective because you just talked for an hour without interruption. So clearly your ADD wasn't happening an hour ago. So they'll come up with these excuses for why they feel like there's a superiority that you'll see from them. They can be very superficial. They're very concerned with the cars people drive and the houses that they live in and where they go on vacation and how they look. They'll often make comments about people's appearance, like a man making a comment about a woman's appearance, or disparaging her if she doesn't look the way he thinks a woman should look. And they're very entitled. I mean, they don't want to wait in line. They believe they are a VIP. They believe the rules don't apply to them. So they just make the rules that work for them. And they have no problem, like walking into the post office, 20 people in line, and they'll just try to walk right up to the front. And they're a little bit shocked when people say, no, there's a line back here. And instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that, they'll kind of huff and puff. So it's, those are the things you see. And then there's this they're very sensitive. If you give them even the most constructive, well thought out feedback, they will lash out. So what it means is you can't work with them. You can't communicate with them, because anytime you're going to give them anything but good news, they really lose it and they rage.
Oh, wow. So how do you, like, if you're working for someone like that, or you're in a relationship with someone like that, how do you protect yourself? We could probably make the distinction, maybe, in a relationship that's a little different in, I don't want to say more or less voluntary. Some people, I think,
versus a family.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or versus a job of like, well, gosh, I've got to provide for my family, so I have to deal with this. But if it was in my personal life, like, I'm out of here, I'm not going to deal with that.
The rules are always the same, because here's the thing: not everyone can get out of every relationship, whether it's a mother, a father, a partner, a sibling, or a boss. Some people can't leave any of those situations, and some people I've worked with a lot of people who cut out their parents. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. So anything is possible and anything is impossible. The key is pretty simple, actually. Number one, realistic expectations. This is who this person is, and they ain't going to change. Not for you, not for me, not for anybody else. And so it's radical acceptance, frankly, that this is a jerk. Okay. And once you have radical acceptance, you do the most key element of all. You don't personalize it.
Because
a lot of people
they blow up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's not about you.
They blow up. They would have blown up at anyone who made that comment about the tie. They would have blown up at anyone who made the comment about the restaurant. They just blow up. You happen to be in the purview of the blow up. Just like a bomb isn't personal. It just goes off, blows up anyone who's near it. They're like bombs. I mean, they're just going to blow up anyone who's near them. So you got to not take it personal. Radical acceptance. It's not going to change. Realistic expectations. What you see is what you get. Don't try to fix it. And don't believe their false promises. Narcissists do a lot of what is called future faking. I'm going to change. I'm going to go to therapy. It's going to be better. I've been under so much pressure. Just give me 6 months. That future faking is how they keep buying 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. You stay in, that's fine. I say to people, in fact, one of my books is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? How to Survive a Relationship with a Narcissist. I called it that because 50% of people stay. And if 50% of people stay, I got to give them ways to stay. And so a lot of it is workarounds. A lot of it is cultivating other sources of friendship, support, therapy, places you can go and have sanity and support and mirroring and empathy, because you ain't going to get it with this person. In a job situation, I tell people, you got to figure out what you can get out of this job, document the heck out of everything so you can protect yourself, because it still may not work in your favor, but if anything ever comes down the pike, you're not going to be able to get anywhere with HR unless you've got documentation. And that more often than not, the narcissists outlast the same people in most workplaces, because most people say, I've had it, like, life's too short, and they get out. And then before you know it, there's a critical mass of narcissists and their enablers in a workplace. And those are the last people left standing. And shortly thereafter, the companies usually crumble because those people just can't, there's no way it can keep going. But it is those things. And in essence, it's really, some people just basically, I tell people, don't engage. There's nothing left to talk about. There's nothing you can say to this person without them getting angry. So stick to the weather, stick to oh, look, they're repaving the road. Can you imagine what an interesting time of year to do that?
Nothing personal.
Nothing personal.
Definitely nothing about them.
It can be about them if it's good.
If it's positive.
If it's good. So I tell people one of the great strategies, especially in the workplace and sometimes in families, is what I call narcissistic fluffing. If you really need the workaround, you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so lucky to work with someone of your magnitude in this field. Like, gosh, and then blah, 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 fluff, 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 get what you need, get the heck out.
So if these people are so explosives, are there, like, how do you get out of the relationship or out of the business relationship safely? Because if they're going to explode, and that's kind of their modus operandi.
Extricating from a narcissistic relationship is a nightmare. Now, in the luckiest scenario, they leave. Even if you take some hits on it, and a lot of people will feel abandoned and hurt. I'm like, oh, heck no, you just won the toxic people lottery. Like, they got out. If you try to extricate, it is going to be a campaign of vindictiveness, a smear campaign. They're going to rally other people around you to do their bidding. Those are called flying monkeys. They will run your name through the mud. They will pursue legal action, because one of the things that narcissistic personalities are obsessed with is winning. They have to win. Again, that fragile ego. And winning might mean they will spend more in lawyers' fees in a divorce to avoid giving you more
anything.
of the money. Yeah, exactly. So divorces get messy in workplaces. They will run a business into the ground before you can leave the business partnership. And I tell people there is no graceful exit. You're almost limping out of here, lucky to have the shirt on your back. And that is where, especially when it comes to business situations, I tell people you almost need to be more careful there than you would in a marriage, because they really could take anything you've ever earned and destroy it. And so it's often not easy. And what that does sometimes mean is very, very carefully clad agreements on the front end. Will the narcissist follow them? No, they're hypocrites. They don't believe the rules apply to them. If the document is crafted well and it can have legs in court, you're in a better place. But anyone who knows, when they've tried to extricate, everybody's relieved once they're out of the relationship, but it almost can feel like post-traumatic stress, given what they have to go through to get out of those relationships, stalking, you name it. It can be pretty awful.
It's just almost like a scorched earth policy with narcissists. It's if I can't have it, nobody can have
nobody
it.
Can have it. Yeah.
I'm going to make your life miserable just because I can.
Yep, because I can, and because the idea that you could, again, the ego is so threatened, they have to destroy everything in their wake.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. I mean, I'm sure people who've gone through this, where they've dissolved businesses and it was a nightmare for them. Marriages ended. It is a nightmare to watch this. And ironically, despite the nightmare, the people say, "I still know I did the right thing." They don't say, "I wish I had stuck it out." Just only sad at what got lost.
Is it almost like intentionally giving in on? I don't say giving in, but intentionally giving up certain things to give the appearance of winning?
No, absolutely.
That way the person has I've gotten something, therefore I've won. That way you can actually get out without harm or with less harm.
It's a big, big issue when you go talk about narcissistic divorces. It's this idea of, somebody I work with, her name's Rebecca Zung. She talks a lot about leverage. That with there's always leverage with everyone. With a narcissist, a big part of the leverage is figure out how they need to feel like they've won. And what I always say to people, you can never, ever, ever, ever let a narcissist know your hand. You got to think like a poker player. They cannot know the cards you're holding. So in the divorce example that I could give you is they can't. So many people want to be like a lioness about their children, right? You're never going to take my children. You know what they're going to now spend? That narcissist is going to take every cent they have to ensure they get more custody than they even wanted of those kids, just to stick it to you. In a business, it may be that there's one carve out on that business that was the most important to you. Your business partner's not even interested in it. If they know you are, they're going to do everything they can to ensure they've got a piece of that action. If they want to hurt, they want you to feel as bad as they do, and they want to win. So it really is important to keep your powder dry, to not let them see your hand. Figure out what matters to them. Cry crocodile tears when they take something away, so they think it's the thing that you wanted. And you've really, really got to think like them. Which is kind of dark, but it's absolutely true.
So kind of like be cool, calm, and collected on the things that matter, and oh my gosh, this is so horrible on the things that don't matter to you.
Oh, I remember working with one lady who I trained her that when it came to custody time, that I trained her to say, like, hey, you got to say to him, oh man, like, wow, having every other weekend to myself it's going to be great. There's all these friends I've been wanting to see, these things I've been wanting to do. That guy gave her every weekend back like that, which is what she wanted all along. She wanted to be with her kids as much as possible. Bam.
The whole reverse psychology.
That's literally, yes. But it's much more that you figure out what their pressure points are and you don't ever let them know. Because again, we think that if we express what we want to another human being, they'd be like, oh, let me meet you on that.
Because normal, rational people would be willing to meet you halfway, but they're not normal, rational people. Yeah.
Even in the business example, even in that carve out might even be not the profitable arm of the business, but it's intellectual property you want to develop. They would actually lose money taking it. They want to take it because it's the thing you want. So that's what I'm saying is that a lot of people say, the only part of this business that matters to me is this. Don't ever, ever do that with them.
Gotcha. And so in closing out, I noticed that most of the conversation talking about narcissists is masculine focused.
Yes, which is unfair.
And like, if I think back through my mind, like, I think that seems to be consistent with what I've seen in people. Does it Does narcissism tend more male than female, or is it just kind of expressed a little differently, or do we make excuses for it differently?
I think we make excuses for it differently. Listen, at a population level, are there more male than female narcissists? Yes, there are. Are there lots of female narcissists? You better believe it. And I think that part of it is that we may make more excuses. But listen, for the number of people I work with who had narcissistic mothers, I've had more people tell me about narcissistic moms than dads. So it means there's obviously a lot of narcissistic women out there. Many men and many women out there have dated narcissistic women and can really tell you that the absolute horrific mess of a divorce it was. And many times it's difficult for men to get custody of kids too. And so it's if they had a narcissistic ex-spouse, it gets very complicated. I think that the way we socialize boys makes men more vulnerable. Men are taught to silence their emotions. They're mocked for expressing emotion. And a big part of what narcissism is that incapacity to engage in emotional communication, to be in touch with their emotions, to be self-reflective about their emotional states. And I think that in that way, that's where I think so sadly we've done men such a disservice. I wish we let boys cry and encourage men to cry. It would be the most profound revolution of our time if we could do that. And so that I think that socialization is why we see more of it. I think that our role expectations of men tend to be more competitive, confrontational, combative. Women who are arrogant, women who are brash and outspoken, they do tend to get shut down and shaped differently by society. Men would be like, you're a player, good guy. And women would be called obscenities and that kind of thing. So I think women, though, might be more likely to express their narcissism through victimhood. The world is always out to get me. Nobody ever cares for me. So it feels like this passive aggressive maneuver. But at the end of the day, it hurts the person on the receiving side.
Gotcha. So it's probably not so much that it's more or less male or female, but kind of how these roles are nudged along by societal factors.
I think the way they're nudged along, again, at a population level, there's no two ways about it. It's a more male prevalent pattern for sure, but it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of women. I think people have misheard me when I've said that. They're like, what are you trying to say, Dr. Ramani? I'm like, no, lots of narcissistic women out there. Trust me, I've been on the receiving end of more than a few of them, and it ain't pretty. So it's more of at a population level, sure, but I do think that the expression of it too can look a little bit different gender. But it's definitely a pattern that doesn't know from gender.
Okay, so the underlying patterns are the same, and probably underlying prevalences are the same, but in the way that we see it expressed in society is different, and so we maybe we look at it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, social media is a great, great, great platform to see how many female narcissists there are who are engaging in tremendous attention seeking, shameless, use of social media, lots of saying very insensitive things, that kind of thing. All of that happens in that space. And so it's and I think that probably in social media, it's probably pretty evenly distributed in male and female, to be honest with you. So in that world, we probably see it pretty close to 50-50.
Yeah, it seems to me social media is the truest expression of who a person really is in some way. I mean, obviously it's very curated, but almost the more curated it is, the more you know that it's not real. Like that's who they really are in some sense. Not necessarily how their life is going, but like how they see themselves and how they want the world to see them.
How they want the world to see them and what they wish their life was like.
Wow. This has been great.
Thank you. I'm so glad. Well, I mean, again, at the end of the day, you're trying to blow the lid off of people who are scammers. And as you could imagine, I'd say the vast majority of scammers are psychopaths or narcissists. No one else would want to so meticulously take advantage of other people without empathy, without guilt, without remorse. That's there's a very special form of ick that is able to perpetrate that kind of behavior.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I do the podcast, is I want people to realize that there are people out there that are, let's say, damaged, whether it's intentional or whatever, that like their goal is to just take advantage of people, and they don't care.
They don't care.
It's very hard for me to figure that out. I'll tell a story. Probably 20 years ago, I ran an online bookstore selling Bibles. and my biggest sale was on a fraudulent credit card. Because in my mind, I just would never have thought, like, why would someone want to steal Bibles? Like, that's just, like, there's a special place reserved for people who, but to them, I think it was like, hey, here's an easy mark. They're going to, this is someone who's going to assume the best. And then my truck with the company logo got stolen. I thought, that's probably, that's pretty messed up also.
Yep. No. I mean, and I think that everything from the various internet scams you see to scams where people are taking advantage of senior citizens and phone scams and, what are they? 411 scams, or what are the ones
419 scams.
419 scams and all of that. What do? They play on, these are people who play on people's vulnerabilities, on people's aspirations and people's hopes. It shows absolutely no empathy. I would be willing to bet the farm on the fact that anyone willing to perpetrate any form of scam is also treats their partners horribly, is not a good parent, is unkind to the people around them, is probably abusive of their workforce of fellow scammers, if there is such a thing. But it's, I definitely think that there's a toxicity in that space that, and they're big talkers. And at the end of the day, what happens is the reason scammers get away with so much in terms of even like drawing people towards them is that they are big talkers. And it's amazing how the whole world could easily get played by somebody who wants to talk a big game, is basically nothing more than a circus barker. And so it's that people want to believe the magic. They want to believe the magician's trick. And it's, I'd say obviously, as all things in life, anything seems too good to be true. It is. But I think there's enough of a little kid in everyone. They want to believe things that are too good to be true. They could be working on an old conflict. And I think that there's actually a resistance on the basis of people to believe that there's actually some really rotten, horrible people out there, and they're just rotten and horrible. And that's a terrible thing for psychologists to say, but I have to tell you, I've seen too many good people's lives ruined by horrible ones, and I'm tired of it, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's easier to believe. I've always, you can tell me if I'm wrong, and I'll listen. Like, I sometimes believe it's easier for people to believe in conspiracy theories and, wild schemes than to believe that there's just bad people or just bad things just happen. It's easier to believe the conspiracy than, gosh, we don't have control over everything. Bad things happen sometimes.
Yeah, bad things happen sometimes, but also I think that, it's all, and there'd be a conversation for another day. It's why do people believe in conspiracies? But I do think it's also this sense of once somebody takes advantage of you, plan on them doing it again. Because if there's only one simple precept of human behavior, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So it's, the first time you scam me, shame on you. The second time you scam me, shame on me.
Shame on me.
And it's the same for every human relationship. I'm not a big fan of giving too many second chances, because I think that I'd say I usually give two people twice out the gate and I'm like, yeah, no, we're good.
Yeah, that's if you're not going to actively change.
Yeah, no, and people with these personality styles, there's no way they'll ever do the deep dive to view that there's something that needs to be changed. Every so often, I get that interesting email from someone who's like, I see this, I see myself in your videos, and I say, okay, here's an 11-point plan. It ain't easy. So yeah.
So if people want to learn more, do you have a website, a video series where people can learn more about narcissism and beyond?
A great place to start with me is with my YouTube channel. Every day we put out new content. We have, we must now have well over 100, or if not in hundreds of videos on everything you could ever imagine about narcissism. And that's at Dr. Ramani, DoctorRamani. That's probably the best clearinghouse of stuff. You can follow me at Instagram, also at Dr. Ramani. I have a website, drramani.com, doctor-ramani.com. And that's a clearinghouse of everything, articles and information and literature and virtual speaking kinds of events, and all of that stuff is in one place, and links to YouTube. And I have 2 books. One is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist. And the second is called Don't You Know Who I Am? How to Stay Sane in an Era of Narcissism, Entitlement, and Incivility. So, take it on, and I take it on in many different ways. And so, there's lots of ways to get this information.
Great. We'll make sure to link to all those and link to the books as well. And Dr. Ramani, I super appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. Coming from an IT space, this is so interesting to me and very foreign to me. But I really appreciate you being able to explain things even in a way that an IT guy can understand.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know there's more than a little narcissism in the IT world. So hopefully some of your IT colleagues can get themselves out of toxic cycles they're stuck in.
Yes, I'm sure there is. Thank you very much. I super appreciate your time.
It was nice to meet you. Bye-bye now, Chris.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Prey podcast. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Dr. Ramani Durvasula can be found at easyprey.com/21.